I'm Fonzo.
And I'm Eliza.
And we're the co-host of Grown, a podcast from the Moth that shows we're never fully grown.
Growing up feels like a phase that should end at some point, but does it ever really? Whether you're 16 or 26 or 86, you're gonna have to deal with family drama, your body, and the type of person you want to be. So why not put it all out in the open and go through it together?
Join us every other week to deal with cringe, culture, and the courageous efforts of people like you to get grown.
Start listening today. Follow Grown on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.
This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao.
You can hint at it, you can talk around it, you can shroud it in euphemisms, but you cannot directly talk about sex with anyone who is not married.
That's Ashley Lumpkin talking to a live audience of hundreds of people this past October at our first ever Embodied event. The challenge we posed to her and 4 other storytellers: tell us about your personal experiences with purity culture and how they shaped your faith, relationships, and sexuality. Last week in our podcast feed, we shared part 1 of the event. If you didn't hear it, pause me and go give it a listen. Today, we're bringing you the rest of the show. Before we dive in, let me set the scene. We hosted the event at the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham. Their theater space is a former sanctuary with 24 stained glass windows and wooden pews. On stage right, Quilla, the incredible DJ who wrote our theme music, was set up to spin tunes for the show. And on center stage, there was a cozy living room style setup with 2 couches, end tables, and a plant. Each of our storytellers stepped up to a mic at the front of the stage. They had been coached in the weeks before by Jeff Polish, the executive director of the Monty, to tell their true life stories without notes. Up first in part 2 is storyteller Ashley Lumpkin, who you heard from at the top of this episode. She's a Georgia-raised, Carolina-based writer, editor, actor, and educator. She's the author of 5 collections of poetry and the coach of the Bull City Slam team.
So the first rule of purity culture is do not talk about sex. You can hint at it, you can talk around it, you can shroud it in euphemisms, but you cannot directly talk about sex with anyone who is not married. Which is interesting because in all of the silence around sex, it also hypersexualizes everything, be that the bodies of children or even our experiences with God. So I remember once in a Sunday school class, there was an older woman who had been invited to our church to speak as a part of a conference. But Sunday school was not a part of that conference, and she'd not been given those instructions. And so there was one point at which she made this comparison between the fatigue you might have of being under the influence of the Spirit being the same as the fatigue you might have after having an orgasm. And that's a different story for a different day, but I remember that everyone in the class turned to face me and the only other unmarried girl in the class, and they were staring, mouths open. And one of the church elders is "Mother, there are singles in the room." And she just started apologizing because she knew she had made this fatal mistake of talking about sex when there were unmarried folks in the room. And it's always been interesting to me, for this group of folks that really cares about what you think about sex, they're really loose about what the messaging actually is. My older brother got the talk by accident. He walked in on my parents once, tragedy, and afterwards he told me and he told our little brother that Dad told him, this is the most fun you're ever gonna have, but you gotta wait until you're married. And that was it. That was the whole talk. But even that was something. My younger brother and I never got any kind of talk. I'm almost 40 now, and I have literally never had a conversation about sex with any member of that community, which is kind of like ridiculous and funny now. But what it means is that, in middle and high school, all of my body image issues had like some nice spiritual language to cover them up. It also meant that I made really unwise decisions with my body, and even into college, putting myself in some really dangerous situations. It meant that I had like no capacity to talk about what was going on with me and my body and my sexuality. While at the same time, like being in college was also transformative, right? So I'm like unpacking my own faith and unpacking my identity and figuring out, oh snap, I might be queer. And like all of these things are happening. I'm having these really like eye-opening experiences. And then I have to go home for breaks and like put all of that back into a very small box. So here I am at home for one of those breaks, watching a movie with mom and dad, when the worst thing possible happens. The main characters start making out. My mother, she's like shifting in her seat and coughing. My dad is like frantically searching for the remote control. And just as the clothes on the screen are coming off, my dad is able to like pause the movie and he's like, babe, did you have the talk with Ashmo? And she's like, no, I thought you were gonna handle that with the kids. And they're going back and forth, until finally I interject and I say, hey guys, I know it's a little late to be thinking about having the talk with me, but let's just do it now. What do you want to know? I wish that I could tell you like what went through my mind in that moment, that I was like, filled with power and like I was gonna reclaim, my own identity right here in front of my parents. But really, I was just trying to get us through this awkward stage and into any other emotion. We didn't talk. After a few moments of me like watching them go through all the stages of grief, I just kind of like got up and walked out of the room. But every now and again, I think about that moment, and I wish that I hadn't have stopped them. I really want to know what they would have said. Thank you.
Ashley Lumpkin. I really want to know what they would have said, so we're going to have to ask them. Coming up, we have our fifth and final storyteller of the evening, Ryan Clark. And Ryan is someone that we met at Embodied through the person that he is creating a documentary with, Nathan. And Nathan was a guest in the original Embodied Purity Culture show that inspired tonight's event. And the seed idea behind tonight's event really was that Purity Culture show started so many conversations within our team, within folks who contributed their stories to that show, within folks who talked to us about what they had heard, and really felt like this was a topic they wanted to hear more voices talking about openly, and talking about in connection with all of the things that Embody is always trying to talk about: sex, body, relationships, all of the above. So we are thrilled to welcome Nathan's co-documentary partner, Ryan, as our final storyteller. Ryan Clark is a writer, speaker, and creator of things. He is a woodworker, but before woodworking, he enjoyed a career in higher education and religious nonprofits. He loves to talk about sex, organizational dysfunction, furniture design, and grief. He is the co-host of Touch Podcast. And in that podcast, his disarming humor gets to the heart of what matters most. He lives in Decatur, Georgia, with his family. Ryan Clark, welcome to the stage.
When I was 15 years old, I was walking down the aisle of the First Baptist Church, along with 20 other youth, holding my pledge card. My card that promised to remain sexually pure, abstinent until marriage. And as the sweat trickled down my back, I prayed to Jesus, "Dear Lord, please take away my sexual desire. I am so horny. But I want to keep this promise, and I want to be a good guy." See, good guys didn't pressure girls into having sex. Good guys didn't bump and grind on the dance floor. We didn't drink, we didn't smoke, and we didn't masturbate very often. And so we filled our lives with Bible studies and church camps and retreats and mission trips, all to this end. There was this promise: if we didn't have sex until marriage, we would have the most amazing, wonderful sex lives that we could ever imagine. And of course, we could imagine. So when I went to college, I doubled down on the Jesus stuff. I became the worship leader. I led the retreats. We went to the Christian rock concerts, and I led the mission trips. I even met my wife on a mission trip. She had signed the purity pledge as well. And our courtship was so sweet. It was long distance, and so we wrote each other handwritten letters and mailed them through the mail with a stamp. And when we decided to get engaged, we did marital counseling with not one, but 2 ministers. And we did the great big workbook, every page of it. Now, we were hot for each other, and we wanted to have sex, but only the right way. Because after all, I was a good guy, and if I could just hold on a few more months, I would be having the most amazing, wonderful, earth-shattering, wake up the neighbors, pornographic, swing it from the chandelier sex I could ever imagine. Well, our wedding was beautiful. Big steeple church. We had 9 bridesmaids. And as we left the reception, we were nervous and excited. In a few short moments, I would be seeing the things and tasting the bits. I could not wait. Our honeymoon was amazing, but it was weird. And we got naked, but the line that we had had before, it still existed. When I tried to kind of brush past that line, no matter how sweetly or how warmly I thought I was being, my wife's body tensed up. And I was like trying to think of everything that I could do or not do, and nothing was working. And that tensing of her body eventually turned into a full-blown recoil. This sweet couple who had bumped into each other as we walked down the sidewalk, we were now avoiding bumping into each other in our own hallway. At night, as the sun started to set, this dark cloud would descend on our tiny basement apartment. And Cindy would start kind of avoiding me, and I was trying to be attentive and do whatever a good Christian husband was supposed to do. But it wasn't long until we were just sad. We were broken. So we went to Christian marital counseling and left Christian marital counseling, and we found another counselor, and she had been to seminary, but she also had a statue of Buddha in the corner. Her name is Terry, and we went to Terry's office, and we sat down, and I sat clutching one side of the couch, and Cindy was clutching the opposite side of the couch. And Terry came in, and we were talking, telling a little bit about what was going on. And she said, "Well, I need to ask you something. Have you come here today to try to save your marriage, or are you here to figure out how to end it?" I could not look at my wife. but I had this sense that she was nodding her head. And so I started nodding my head. And I looked over, we were nodding our heads. Yes, we are here to save the marriage. So we talked some more, and then Terry kind of jumped in again, and she said, I think the two of you need a do-over. It's like somewhere in this thing, I can tell you have a lot of love for each other, but there's so much hurt, and you didn't learn what intimacy is. And then she said, I wonder if you would consider taking sex off the table, at least temporarily. And we were still nodding, so I was still nodding. And I noticed Cindy was nodding even faster. And so I sped up and matched her. But inside, I was thinking, this is not what I signed up for. But we went home, and as evening drew near, there was a little bit of lightness between us. And so we went back to marriage counseling, and this time she said, would you guys mind sitting next to each other? And would you mind holding hands? And so we held hands, and I noticed Cindy leaned into me a little bit. But this session got pretty emotional, and at one point, Cindy cried out, I don't understand why he's trying to get me to have sex. Only bad guys do that. And I was like, bad guy? When the hell did I become a bad guy? Like our whole relationship was some kind of ruse to steal her virginity. No, I had done the time. I had done the work. I deserved my reward. That was many more counseling sessions. Because by making sex the reward for my good behavior, turned my wife's body into the object of that reward. It's like if I come home and I take out the trash and I put my dirty socks in the laundry and I do the dishes, I should get sexed. I'm a good boy. And for Cindy, after having complete agency and autonomy over her body, she was expected literally overnight to give that all away. And she learned that any guy, even a good guy, could suddenly behave like a bad guy. I had to give up on the idea that sex was my reward. But when I did, Cindy was finally able to relax around me. And then I had to find the words, how to communicate my deep love and affection for this woman who I truly adored with all my life. And we both had to relearn what intimacy was with our minds and with our bodies. And we had to trust that the other person wasn't working some kind of angle. We had to believe deep down that we didn't have to be perfect to be good. I had to believe that God wasn't using Cindy to punish me. I had to believe that I wasn't going to be punished for being honest. So, 23 years of marriage later, I'm still learning that transactional relationships are toxic. That God is not mad at me for being horny, and that there really is something wonderful and magical and amazing about sex. But it's at the heart of letting yourself be known and truly knowing another person. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for Ashley and Ryan. Okay, so we have to start where your story ended, which is If you, now your almost 40-something self, could play out a fantasy version of what that conversation between you and your parents would look like, what would that be?
I wish they would have just told me the truth about what we actually believe and not like the tradition that they substituted for belief. That we believe that our bodies are handcrafted by the Creator and as such are beautiful, that we believe that sex is this gift from Him that is also beautiful, that is an embodied expression of a unity and a love that cannot be articulated with words, that is powerful enough to generate life and as such is probably safest and more life-giving if had with a covenant partner who also promises to love you and honor you and provide for you and be there for you. And those are the things that we believe. And whether or not I continued on with that belief, who knows? But I think that would have been a more powerful starting point than your body is gross, save it for your husband. So I wish that we had started with the truth.
Do you think there's a version of that conversation that you could have in the future?
With my parents?
Yeah, come on.
So what's interesting is I really, really recently came out to my parents in a way that when I came out to them, I was like, come on, guys, nothing about me is straight, but, and hasn't been. So I kind of, when I came out to them, I was very surprised that they were surprised. But I was also expecting a lot of retribution and get out of my house and all these other sorts of things. I fully expected them to not speak to me, and that has not been the case. My partner and I go home for Thanksgiving, and that's been kind of fantastic. So maybe there is a world in which we can talk about sex, but
we're some steps away.
Not today. Maybe I'll let them listen to the podcast.
I was gonna say, if you want to invite them, we'll do it over the radio, and then. So Ryan, you have two kids who I think they're in their teenage years, entering teenagedom.
13 and 9.
Okay, 13 and 9. So they're at this formative stage of thinking about their bodies and their emerging sexualities. What kind of conversations are you having with them, and how is that, I don't know, how are you trying to do things differently for them to not have the same harm that you had?
Very differently, yes. Yeah, we're very open about sex at our house. My wife and I are very affectionate publicly in front of them. We've given them all the age-appropriate sexual material for them to read and have in their room privately. And our daughter, who is the eldest, is very, very outgoing, very extroverted, very sort of funny and matter of fact, and she kind of will keep up with us a little bit. And although our 9-year-old son is a very different personality, he's very introverted, he's very private. And so the challenge we are having is that they've been very different receiving that information. Our daughter was like, yeah, that's cool. We're good. And our son, there's some kids you can have a long sex talk with. Our son is we have to have 100 1-minute conversations with him. Yeah, and when we're watching a movie or a TV show where something like making out happens, or people are talking about sex, or we're watching Gilmore Girls again, and Rory just lost her virginity to Dean, and we're looking around yeah, what?
Anyone
you guys want to talk?
I love that. Ashley, you teach high school? Okay, so how are you seeing, I guess, what is the version of purity culture that you're seeing show up in the lives of your students, if at all? How is the purity culture of this moment maybe different from what you experienced a couple decades ago?
So what's really interesting is my students are really open and honest with me about things that they are not particularly perhaps open and honest with their parents about. And I think they are that because I tell them like, hey guys, I'm a mandated reporter. So anything that you tell me, like I get it out of my room as soon as possible to a counselor, to whomever I think needs to hear it. And so what perhaps is sad that a lot has not changed. The only thing that has changed is that kids have more immediate access to sex and information about sex. And that information might come in the form of like porn, or it might come in the form of like actual informative articles. Who knows? Because their parents aren't talking to them about it. And so I think the thing that I am seeing is that purity culture is still as pervasive, and still like parents are still not talking to their kids about sex, but because the information is available, the kids are like, hey, Miss Lumpkin, here's this thing I heard about on Urban Dictionary. Have you heard about it? And I'm like, yes, I have. Please don't talk to me about that. Go talk to the nurse immediately. So yeah, I think that like more information is available, but also more disinformation is available. And so kids are really just out here fending for themselves in ways that are kind of dangerous.
We were joking in our green room earlier with Ryan about him being the token white man of this evening. And so I just want to ask you about that. No, but about how kind of deconstructing your whiteness and your masculinity has played into how you're unraveling purity culture, and how you're reflecting on those identities kind of being brought apart by the unraveling of everything else in this moment.
Wow, that's a fantastic question. So I didn't grow up in church. And so my family of origin was very open and very funny about sex. We'd joke about sex at the dinner table. And I remember one time in high school, my mom yelling when I was leaving with my friends, "Don't forget to wear condoms." And so that was like my home life, but my home life was not spiritual and was chaotic at times. And so when I got involved in church were all these like really warm and fuzzy people who would hug me. And it was just a really sweet kind of wholesome environment that I needed at the time, which led me to making the commitment that I did. And in that home, I was raised by a single woman who was very strong, who, you know, was the one who talked to me, had the sex talk with me, who could communicate and was really honest about men she dated. And that was a real gift, because I didn't have this, while I ended up with a really kind and wonderful stepdad, the kind of sexuality that was modeled at home, though I rejected it in some ways when I got involved with church, I had a foundation of a kind of kinder, gentler man. And so I think for me that was a gift as I went through, and something that as I started deconstructing and going to therapy and figuring out how I felt about things, I realized I was attracted to really strong females, to really strong women. And I think that it never occurred to me that I had to be, the one thing I didn't agree with my sort of fundamentalist roots in church was that I had to be like this dominating man who like took over and was in charge and everybody listened to me. I always felt like my relationships with women were partnerships, and it was, so there was always a tension there for me between that and sort of the dominant religious culture.
All of that, I guess, leads me to my final question for both of you, which is, we've been hearing a lot tonight about the role that faith has played in everyone's perception of themselves and intersections with their various identities. Where are you now in your relationship to your faith, now that you've been on this journey and are kind of at this, you've reckoned with a lot of the ways in which your faith has harmed you? How would you describe your relationship with your faith now?
So I am really, really trying hard to follow Jesus. And there are like tensions within that because of the various identities that I hold. There are tensions because, you know, I currently go to like a predominantly white church, which is like weird for me because I grew up Kojic, and like that's a whole other thing. And so like trying to like navigate like what do we actually believe about race, and like so that's interesting. But I'm really, really, really trying to follow Jesus in a way that's like about following Jesus and not following like the traditions that we superimpose upon Christianity. And so that's sometimes a struggle, but I think like, I don't know, like there's no love that I have found like it. And I think that as I truly and authentically try to follow Christ, that I also like find out more about who I actually am.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, that's really life-giving for me.
It's beautiful.
I think, so my family were members of this quirky little Baptist church that has a bisexual pastor who just got engaged to one of our former female ministers. And it's been an opening and affirming congregation since the 90s, Oakhurst Baptist Church. Wonderful church. And so we're involved there. I teach Sunday school. My wife's in leadership there. And for me, the most important thing at this point in our life is having a community around us, people who love us, people who will hug your neck, who will look out for you, bring you food when you're sick. And that's something we want for ourselves, and we want for our children to know that living in community, allowing yourself to be loved by other people and loving others is the way to be, to make it, day by day.
That was writer and speaker Ryan Clark and poet and educator Ashley Lumpkin. They both shared their stories on stage last October at the Embodied live event, Purified. You can learn more about these two at the links in our show notes. And if you want to see some photos from the event, you can find those at the Embodied radio show page. We had such a blast at this live event, and we really hope to do something like it again next year. It is a real thrill to gather with you all in person and be in community around these stories. Thank you so much for all of your support this entire year, for listening to Embodied episodes, for sharing your stories on them, and for helping us build a community around this content. We couldn't have done it without you. We're going to take a break from our podcast next week to rest and spend time with our families, but we'll be back with a brand new show on January 6th to kick off 2023. Embodied is a production of North Carolina Public Radio WUNC, a listener-supported station. If you want to lend your support to this podcast or WUNC's other shows on demand, consider a contribution at WUNC.org now. Incredible storytelling like you hear on Embodied is made possible because of listeners like you. Our Purified live event was hosted in conjunction with the Monty at the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham. Jeff Polish of the Monty coached each of our storytellers, and Quilla was our DJ who also wrote our theme music. Today's episode of Embodied was produced by Audrey Smith and Kaya Finlay. Amanda Magnus is our editor, Madison Spire is our intern, and Jenny Lawson is our technical director. The show was also made possible with engineering and mastering support from Al Widarski, EJ Thorne, and Sean Rue. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode of Embodied in 2022, we would love to hear from you. Send us a note, embodied@wunc.org, or even better, post about it on social media and tag us. You sharing the word with your friends and community is what helps Embodied grow, and it really means a lot. Until next time, and until next year, I'm Anita Rao, taking on the taboo with you.